I've put in provisions in my LLCs that if I pass, then my wife, it kind of transfers to my wife, and she has all authorities to act on behalf of the LLCs and all that stuff. Because, I don't want my employees not to be able to get paychecks and her not to be able to sell the assets of the LLCs because she doesn't want to. If I pass, my wife doesn't want to continue to manage a business, right? She's going to shut it down. She's going to probably transfer the assets or whatever. So, hey guys, welcome to the Probate House Guy Podcast. I'm Brad, your host, the Probate House Guy, and I am starting a new series where we are going to have a probate attorney from all 50 states on the show to talk about probate across the country. So my first episode, I've got my buddy Josh Nelson. Josh and I are old college buddies from back in the day. And he has come on today to talk about probate stuff in the state of Georgia. So Josh, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your firm and, give us a little bit of background.
Yeah. So Brad, definitely appreciate you having us on. Love what you're doing. Is a resource not only for the investors, but also for the people that have lost a loved one, have this house that they don't know what to do with. I love your mission here. And so I'm Josh Nelson, attorney with Nelson Elder Care Law. Me and Brad know each other for, going on 20 years now, back whenever we used to run Jeeps in the woods and play with cars a little bit too much.
That's right.
And so over the years, we've grown my practice into really trying to help people pre-plan so they aren't stuck in probate. You don't have to go through this process if the deed's right or if there's a trust in place. But a lot of people still end up with a will or maybe not even having a will. And they get confused by probate. They get told how scary it is. They get told it's going to cost a bunch of money and take forever. And we're here to try and put some light on that. Let them know it doesn't have to be stressful. If you know what you're doing, if you can get the money on the other side right, this can be a pretty straightforward process that really doesn't take more than a month or two to get the money into the estate. It might take, 6 to 9 months to get it out, but at least you have the confidence then of knowing you as the party in charge of this, the one that is accountable to your siblings or your family. It's all taken care of. You're just waiting for those checks to get freed up from the court.
Definitely. So what made you decide to be a probate attorney? Like where did that come from, right?
Yeah, really by chance. So I started out as a tax attorney. I loved that. And then my mom was working with what's called elder law, which is helping people plan to protect their assets as they age so that not only from scams, but government, being qualified for different kind of subsidies and programs like that, and then ultimately skipping probate. And I got into that with her. We grew the practice for a couple of years and loved it. And people were just coming to us where they'd done their planning, but maybe their sister hadn't. Maybe they'd done their planning, but their parents hadn't, and asking us to do probate. And what we found was I wasn't necessarily enthusiastic about it back then. So we'd refer it out, and people would just scalp the executors. Just fees that were ridiculous, or even worse in my mind, you'd refer it out, somebody would quote a low fee, and it would be so low that they wouldn't even put their bar number on the petition. It was like you would go to a consult with this attorney's office. They would help you fill out the form, but they had no liability. And then you go file this thing, the court would kick it back for maybe some small error. And then whenever you went back to the person that didn't put their bar number on it, they're like, well, now it's $10,000. And you're like, what?
Yep. You and I, we were talking about this offline. I'm trying to get a deal closed. And a few weeks ago, right before closing, the title underwriter found some issue with the probate letters. And it turns out it was the same situation that you just described. This lady had gone to an attorney, thought this attorney was helping her do the probate, but his name, which actually, fortunately, his name was not on the petition, so we didn't actually have to go back to him to actually fix the issues. She was able to go in there and do it herself, because then that would have added a couple weeks. He would have had to, recuse himself from the case and all that, right?
But the bigger thing is, if his name was on it, it would have been done right, because the judge can call the attorney in for what's called a mismanagement hearing if something's wrong. So if I put my name on a petition and there's something wrong with it, I got a big problem. I better make sure that thing's right before it leaves my office, before it gets filed. Luckily, in this case, the client that you're working with had you as a resource who does this, a lot. So you knew how to guide her. You had friends and people in the industry that can give her the guidance to get this right. But if she didn't have you, she's like, oh my God, now I got to go find another attorney. I'm mad at the one I already had, so I don't want to go back to him. Now I got to go take a gamble and try another one from scratch. And most attorneys are really hesitant to pick up things mid-process.
Right.
So like if another attorney started it, you got to worry about finishing it, because now I'm almost liable for if that attorney was dumb. And that's scary to me.
Oh, for sure. Well, and attorneys are very risk-averse people in general, right? So, yeah, I agree with you there. And that, fortunately, we got, there was just some very minor hiccups, and I think we're almost to the finish line here.
That's the kind of thing where, we would refer it out, and then whenever you do a referral, it's your name on the line. So I'm not a big fan of doing that thing where you're like, hey, go talk to these 3 people. If I give a referral, I always try and say like, hey, Brad, go talk to Bob. The problem then is if Bob messes up, it's my reputation that I've shared with, that referral partner. And that was the thing that was getting frustrating for us. So we started to bring it in-house, and we would only do probate cases for people that we already had a relationship with, like we're doing a sibling and the other sibling passes away unexpectedly, or we do your plan and your parents pass, maybe we'll do their probate, something like that.
Right.
But then over the years, we just kept getting asked for more and more. You see kind of how most probate attorneys charge for this, which is just astronomical in my mind. It's just ridiculous. And so we were able to come up with a pretty cool idea, what we call pay later probate, where we're able to work with families, not have them come out of pocket at all. We cover all the filing fees. We cover all the labor to make sure that it's done right and that the families are going to be supported, so that they get the money as quick as possible with as least stress, and that the family knows that this is getting done right. Because a lot of the fighting in probate just comes from either lack of communication or lack of trust that it's being handled properly. And so a lot of times probate without attorney guidance can take 6 months to a year before you're even really getting everything where it should be. With an attorney, we usually get that done as a target of 30 to 45 days right off the hit. And us being able to guide families through that makes it so much easier. It's very different than what I do in the other side of my area, which is the pre-planning, but it's really helping people still. And so over the years, I've fallen in love with it. We do on average right now about 600 probate cases a year and have a team of almost 10 people to do that. And so it's really grown over time and been something where, the way that I judge success is like how many families are giving you a hug at the end of the process. And I know that sounds weird to think about, like you just lost your mom or your dad or your husband. Like, are you going to be hugging somebody after this? And the difference is if you do it right, if you're really customer service focused, they do. I can't bring back your loved one, but I can make sure that you're not feel like the gift they're giving you or the legacy they're leaving is a burden.
Well, and you guys are dealing with, and I had, a buddy of mine on my podcast, and he went through probate with his dad. And people, like, not only are you dealing with the death, but then, like, there's a whole bunch of other crap you have to deal with. So a lot of these people, like, already right off the bat are overwhelmed, right, with everything going on, with the emotions, with the grief, with all that. So you guys have to deal with that and the legal piece, and deal with the fact that, oh, by the way, you're dealing with the government on the other side, with the court system, right, which is slow as molasses. So
every county can be different. Every state can be different. I think what you're doing with this 50-state approach is really, really cool, because even what we talk about today with Georgia might be different in a different state. So a lot of people, especially whenever we lose a parent, the biggest thing that they're realizing is that sometimes our parents just didn't have everything in place. Maybe they misunderstood something, or maybe times just changed. If your parents dealt with your grandparents' estate, it might have still been handshake deals, especially here in Georgia. The courts used to be very much like, oh, we'll just help you push that through. And then after the mid-2000s, we started to see a lot of tightening up for that, where it wasn't just, oh, I know you, I knew your mama, I knew your granddaddy. Now they're like, no, like, prove it. And that's a real change. And so if your parents did your grandparents' estate and all they had to do was walk down to the courthouse and shake a couple hands and then walk into the bank and they got money, they didn't really plan because they didn't think they had to. And then all of a sudden, you're the first generation that's really finding out that as things have evolved, the law hasn't necessarily changed, but it's being applied differently. You can't just walk into the bank, even with a will in your hand, and say, hey, my dad passed. I'm the only heir. Can I get my check? They're going to say no. And you're like, I'm confused. I don't understand.
Right, because most people think the will is that, but really the will has to be validated by the court. That's like the point of the probate process, is the court to say, yes, this is a valid will, and yes, you, Mr. Johnny, are in charge of the estate.
And I think the big part that people even miss is probate isn't even designed to just validate the will. It's a protection for creditors.
Right.
So it's to make sure things like Capital One credit cards or Northside Hospital get paid what they're due. Because even if I have $100,000 and I say all of it goes to my daughter, if I owe Capital One 10 grand, she only gets 90 because I got to pay them first. And that's one of the big things that people forget about is how do we make sure that we're getting everything managed, everything brought together. It's sad to see how much money just gets left out there because people don't know about it, right? You know, especially with the paper statements that we have now. It used to be like you could just wait around the mailbox long enough and you'll find out what somebody's assets are. Today, it's a lot harder to do that.
Right, and you could have some old stuff from years ago, and, you know, during that notice to creditors period, all of a sudden some creditor from however long ago says, oh, and it might have been a couple years, but still within that statute of limitations that they can collect, and then all of a sudden, well, what the heck, there goes another $5,000. So that's why that notice to creditors period exists, is to give them time to come forward, right?
It is. And then the good news is, depending on how you file, it can cut off all the claims. So if they don't file in a certain amount of time, you don't need to worry about it any longer. And that's kind of why probate in Georgia really does take 6 months no matter what, is because if you're doing it the right way to cut off those claims, you have to give them some time to make those claims. But the inverse of that, it's not all doom and gloom. We find things during that period that is really cool as far as like bumping the estate value up. So especially right now with crypto, you know, everybody's very diverse on this. Either you hate it, you love it, whatever. But even a lot of people that are passing now, not just people in their 20s, 30s, 40s, but in their 60s, 70s, and 80s, might have a Coinbase account, might have some wallet sitting somewhere. And once you get that permission from the court to act on behalf of the estate, they open up the books on those things for you, even for like crypto. So we have a case going on right now where there's over $1 million of crypto that the wife couldn't get access to without us having these processes in place. Because on your crypto accounts, most brokers don't let you put a beneficiary like at a Fidelity or a Charles Schwab, where you could just say, hey, if I die, it goes to my spouse or my kids. On the crypto, it's almost like it's intended to be lost. But because of some of these protections in Georgia, we can actually go find this stuff, which is cool for the families.
Yeah, there's so many, you know, it almost seems like as time goes on, that will become more and more common, where people will forget about this old, you know, wallet that they have. And all of a sudden there's this crypto sitting in that account that no one knew about, or no one knew that grandpa was trading crypto, you know?
Yeah. And even, you know, kind of the current day version of that is like paper stock certificates. So there's still a lot of people that we do probate for that have paper T-bills, like paper E-bonds, stocks for Coca-Cola or Home Depot that they got back in the 80s or 90s whenever they worked there, that are worth good money now. And they have to go through the process to be able to transfer those things.
Yeah, and that's all a process. So tell me about kind of, we'll jump over quickly to the estate planning piece, right? I mean, that was obviously the original intent of your business, and it still is very much. On our end, when we're buying properties from people, like, I can tell you, I can literally count on, I've done hundreds of deals at this point in time, and I can count, I have done 3 deals where there was a trust involved. 3. That's it. 3. You know, isn't that wild?
I think that if you see the mechanics from like my side of it, it's not as surprising. Most people that do estate planning don't understand estate planning, just to be blunt. They think that a will is all they need, and they don't believe that a will requires you to go through probate, but it really does. But even worse than that, I think the reason that you haven't seen a whole lot of trust properties is because if somebody does a trust, even through an attorney, and they get a good deal, I mean, they're only paying, less than $2,500, the chance that the deed got transferred into that trust is very low. And so you might go around feeling the confidence like you have a good estate plan, or feeling that, everything's wrapped up and your loved ones are going to be taken care of. But if that firm didn't actually fund your trust, it's not going to do anything. You're still going through probate, and deeds get left out all the time. Or even if the first deed got put into the trust, if you don't have a relationship with that firm, whenever you move around or go buy a new house, your closing attorney might put the new house just in your name, and then your trust doesn't control it. And so that's the thing that really sets us apart at Nelson is we have a team that actually like goes with you to the bank to make sure your bank accounts are going to skip probate. We handle all your property deeds. We even work with the tax assessor to make sure that your homestead, and if you're a senior, to get your senior exemption carried over, because we guarantee that if you go through our process and you end up in probate, we're going to do it for free. And
that's great.
Thing that nobody else is going to do, because attorneys like myself usually average about 3% in probate. So if you think about, an average equity in a house or something, probate's expensive. It can cost, easy 10 grand or more. Our average fee for most of the estates we handle ends up being around $10,000. And that's pretty crazy to think about whenever you can do some pre-planning and drive that down to, half that.
Right.
The other issue is whenever you have the houses in the trust, as an investor, as somebody that's trying to go get that property and acquire it, there's some landmines for you guys out there, right? So a lot of times, especially if it's a revocable living trust, it might say like Josh Nelson as trustee of the Nelson Family Trust.
Yep.
But whenever I die, my daughter might not know what to do as successor trustee, or to like make that really where she has like marketable title. You got to go EIN number in most cases. She has to do a new certificate of trust. There's a little bit of paperwork in the background. It's really only about 30 minutes of work, but people just don't understand it. And so for an investor's purpose, she can't just show up at the closing and say, oh, I'm the trustee now, or things are going to go a little bit wonky. And so a good closing attorney, making sure that if this is your real career, you aren't just out there trying to flip one or two deals, but you're really making a real go at this, that you have closing attorneys that are, looking through that stuff. Because otherwise you end up with non-marketable title. On the other side of things, you've rehabbed this house, and then you go to sell it, and they're looking at you like you got two heads. I mean, it's just the kind of thing where making sure the ducks are in a row is a little bit more important with a trust. But more often than not, people just don't see the value because they don't understand it, because they think that probate either isn't going to happen because of the will, or it's not going to be that big of a deal. And sometimes it's just not, but sure. The other thing to look for is, how are you getting guided through the process? How are you making sure that you're not paying like a mortgage or having a house go into foreclosure whenever somebody dies just because there was a bad plan in place?
Yeah. And I just made me think of something. I was on a call before we got on this, and we're working out a deal right now. And this message is to the investors and the agents listening to this in terms of estate planning. If you have LLCs, we have a property we're trying to buy right now where this property is stuck in limbo right now because the guy had an LLC and he didn't have his LLCs set up from an estate planning perspective, and they can't transfer title to this property because it's just stuck. So why don't you kind of speak to that a little bit generally?
I think especially in the late 90s and early 2000s, the idea of having like rental properties, or just even sometimes your homestead property in an LLC, really hit the seminar circuit hard. And so there were a lot of people going around saying, you're going to protect all your investments, you're going to have everything, just put everything in its own LLC.
And then pay hundreds of dollars. And my accountant charges me for every additional LLC that I have to file on. So
I think because you do what you do, you're so sophisticated, you do find that humorous like I do, but there's still a lot of people with a lot of wealth that come in with these kind of structures whenever we're doing the estate planning and not realizing that it doesn't really offer you much, if any, protection. There's a lot of administrative stuff that can go wrong, and the administrative fees are high. And so that's definitely a case where a trust would be better. But let's say that you do get one of these properties as an investor or you're a listing agent, and somebody comes to you and says, this is my dad's LLC. He passed away. I think it's just mine now. Like, mom's not with us. I'm the only kid. What do I do? Whenever people set up these LLCs, if they're set up properly, they have succession language in them that absolutely skips probate. If Josh dies, it goes to Rachel. If Rachel's dead, it goes to Ava, blah, blah, blah. The problem with that is we're never thinking about the negative things whenever we're excited about creating a business or a company. So we don't put in there what happens if partnerships break up. We don't put in there what happens if people die. Those are the things that turn into really big issues. Again, especially if the LLC has multiple members that aren't, husband, wife, that gets super weird. How are we buying out the other part? A lot of LLCs have bad language in them that say, if we sell a major asset and turn it to cash, it dissolves the LLC, but it doesn't really talk about where the language should designate the money go. Some of them have weird buyout provisions that say, if one partner dies, the other partners will just magically pay cash to the surviving spouse, but they forget to buy an insurance policy and it's real estate and there's no way to liquidate this thing. It gets super wonky really fast. So my biggest advice there would be make sure that something in there talks about where the interest of the member goes whenever they pass. You don't even have to go to an attorney with this. If you're sophisticated, you can get that amended into your articles. But if you think your LLC is just the Secretary of State registration and you don't even have a membership agreement, get that first.
Yes, for sure.
LegalZoom, a business attorney even will only charge you $500 or so to get that thing in place, if that. It is mostly boilerplate, but it's the boilerplate that protects your family down the road. As an investor, understand that if the main member died and the LLC doesn't say where the property goes or where the interest goes, it's either gone through probate, or sometimes a faster way, if you're really trying to get a deal closed, is you can take it to superior court and get a declaratory judgment done, which says clearly this is going to go to the spouse or something like that. So if that's the only thing going through probate, or if there's a real time crunch, sometimes you can go to superior court, which is faster than probate court.
Right.
But often those LLCs are going to get wrapped up in probate just because they don't have any succession language in the operating agreement.
And if you have employees of that LLC, I've seen and heard of people who no one can run payroll, right? Because the person died. Who runs payroll, right?
That's one of the biggest things to think about too, is if you have even a checking account over at Bank of America, Chase, Ameris, wherever, if it's personal, you can say, if something happens to me, I'll sign a form that says it goes to Brad, he can continue operations, or it goes to my wife, she gets the money. But an LLC never dies. And since an LLC never dies, you can't put transfer on death or payable on death onto those accounts. And so if they're not already a signer before you get sick or die, it's going through court. And, your employees love you. They want to support you, but you miss a paycheck round or two, you don't have any employees left. That's just the way it's going to work. And
that's right.
I think that's definitely a big deal. The other problem is you see people get in trouble, even if they are a signer, because they're trying to move money that maybe they didn't really have authority to. Remember that you can be personally liable to the creditors of that company or to the estate if you spend money on stuff you aren't supposed to. So we had a family that had a service industry business, and really the phone number is probably the most valuable thing on there, but they had a bunch of equipment as well and some inventory stock for service type stuff. And just to clear it out, because they needed to terminate the lease, the person in charge essentially sold it to a family friend for pennies on the dollar. And the problem with that was then whenever they went through probate, the creditors are like, well, where's the accounting of that? And she's like, oh, I just gave that away for like a couple grand. And they're like, oh, okay. And she didn't realize she did anything wrong. There was no malice behind it. She wasn't trying to, like, get it one over on anybody. But then she had personal liability, and that cost a lot of money in legal fees to fix, where if they would have just had like that $500 operating agreement to start with,
Yep.
it would have just been free. Or especially with LLCs and kids, one of the problems we see is, one of the kids works in the LLC. Maybe mom or dad told them, hey, if I die, this is yours. But if it's not written out that way, it's not going to go that way. It can very easily get split between kids that don't work in the business. That causes a lot of fighting. So again, just make sure whenever we're talking about pre-planning, especially with assets like real estate businesses, you need to have it written down where this stuff goes.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Language. I've put in provisions in my LLCs that if I pass, then my wife, it kind of transfers to my wife, and she has all authorities to act on behalf of the LLCs and all that stuff. Because I don't want my employees not to be able to get paychecks, and her not to be able to sell the assets of the LLCs because she doesn't want to. If I pass, my wife doesn't want to continue to manage a business, right? She's going to shut it down. She's going to probably transfer the assets or whatever. So
even in some businesses, she can't, right? So if you had like a real estate business, or like even in my law firm, non-lawyers can't own law firms. So like I can't transfer it to my wife. Now she can come in and manage it in a short period of time. She can still get paid out the value whenever it's, transitioned away. But that all needs to be planned for. Unfortunately, things like chiropractor offices and CPA offices do this like the worst out of anybody, because both of those are restricted ownership businesses. They're usually pretty small, kind of like, a head primary and a couple staff to help. It's not fair to your staff. It's not fair to your family. Just go ahead and get that stuff locked up.
Right. Yeah, definitely take care of that. Awesome. Well, hey, man, also in this, with this particular group, we've got an audience of investors and agents, and they're always kind of asking me, like, how do I get in with a probate attorney? How do I work with probate attorneys? And there's no like simple answer to that, right? So what would be your advice if someone was reaching out to you and saying, hey, I'd like to work with you or whatever? Do you have any advice on that?
Absolutely. First, let me say with what doesn't work. Just looking through the probate records on the attorney on file and making demands to speak with my clients is not a great way to win favor, right? Anybody can pull that list, but especially whenever you start making demands on somebody's time, that becomes problematic, especially if it's not a offer, so usually we're required to present offers to our clients if they're, bona fide. And that's somewhat okay if you're really bringing in a good offer, but don't be doing like 10% of what the property's worth and saying, hey, can I get your client's information? Can I talk to them? No, is always the answer to that. The better way is to, bring in a sandwich, ask to have lunch with us, say, hey, this is what I'm trying to do. These are the things that I really specialize in, because everybody comes in and tries to be too generic. They're like, I buy every property. Well, no, you don't. Like, what kind of properties are you looking for? What area are you looking for? What's your budget? What's your price range as far as like rehab budget? Do you have the cash to make a deal right away? Or is this the kind of thing where you're going to essentially try and lock in the deal and then go sell it off and want this like 30-day extra time period?
Wholesale it. Yeah. Right. There's tons of those yahoos.
And again, I'm not saying that that's a deal breaker for us, but make sure we know what we're getting into, because that's going to help us go pitch our client. Our clients look to us for advice. And so we're going to have a lot of sway into whether or not your deal gets accepted, and making that so that you guys, as far as investors or wholesalers, are just playing on the same field. As attorneys, we can't ethically take kickback. If you go talk to somebody and they're like, oh, well, my wife's got a real estate license, probably stay away from them. You don't want to be tangled in that kind of thing. So we're not looking for money. We're looking for ease. How do you make it easy on us? How do you make it easy on our clients? How do you make sure that whenever we go to the court and try and get your deal approved, that it's not getting bounced back? So coming with comps that work, making sure that we have an argument we can make to the siblings, making sure that it's going to follow the timeline that it's supposed to follow. Don't be like, hey, I need another 4 weeks to secure financing, stuff like that. And then just do what you say you're going to do. That's probably the biggest thing with
that
is if you say, send me all these houses that people aren't going to stay in and I'll get you offers back within 48 hours, don't take 5 days, because I've committed to my team that we can tell our clients this. And now all of a sudden I got egg on my face. So really just have that integrity, do what you say you're going to do. But again, since we don't have money, we don't have kickbacks in play here, the biggest thing is making it easy on us and easy on the families. And the way you do that is by making sure that the comps match close enough what you are, that you're outlining the budget for rehab. So like say that it's a $500,000 house and you're trying to buy it for 180, that's not out of the question, but you better be able to show me some pictures where the ceilings got mold or the floor needs ripped up or the deck's falling off the back of the house. And then do a ballpark of what that stuff takes to fix. It doesn't have to be like a formal quote or anything, but something that I can present to not only the siblings, but the court to say, here's why we're selling a $500,000 house for 180. And
right. Yeah. Yeah. And one of the things I found that works for us is that it's a quid pro quo game, right? But I refer cases to you first, right? Yeah. And I'm not going to ask for anything in return. And then maybe eventually after the third or the fourth case, I refer you to say, hey, oh, by the way, if you got anybody, send them my way, like.
I think that's, I think one of the things that we struggle with too is just understanding the volume. So whenever you go reach out to an attorney, figure out what the volume is. If you're really only looking to do one deal a month and the attorney's doing, 15, 20, don't expect to be exclusive.
Exactly.
And that's part of it too. But really, again, I think the thing that, most attorneys that I know that do probate are definitely open to working with investors, working with wholesalers. A lot of times the families come, and these are homes that have had ill people living in them. They haven't been renoed. They might be stuck in the 80s or 90s as far as the last time things were updated. Lots of popcorn ceilings, some vinyl planks, yep. Not the LVP, it's the rollout vinyl from, back in the day, right? The fake
That's right.
Yep. Stuff like that. They can't go sell it on the open market, but just remember too that the real estate agents are getting to these things fast, guys. Everybody knows a realtor. And so sometimes we don't have as much pull there as attorneys as you guys think we do. If the realtor's already involved in it, sometimes that can be problematic too. So just make sure you got open communication, but more than anything, just make sure that if we commit to doing something, if we have an agreement where we're going to work together on time deadlines, that we're meeting those.
Yeah, I mean, just doing what you say you're going to do goes so far. I mean, it sounds so simple, but it goes so far, right? Because you've got your client's best interest in mind, right?
I've been doing this for 10 years, and I'll tell you that the referral partners that you stick with aren't just the ones that send you the money. It's the ones that make it easy, make you look good. A little kind of compliment whenever somebody, takes over from you always helps. If you send me something, I'm like, hey, so glad you're working with Brad. I've been, known him for nearly 20 years. Love what he does. Makes everything very systematic and easy to do. He's not out here trying to scalp people. I think this is going to be great. That's a huge thing for me to give to you as far as the referral too. Those ones that we talked about kind of earlier where it's here's 5 probate attorneys, go call them all. That's the worst referral you can get, right? How would you guys like it on your investor side if I'm here's 5 investors, go let them bid against each other and see what happens, right?
No, that's the dog and pony show, as we call it.
Have them all show up at 2:00 on Friday, all at the same time, walk through together with their clipboards and make a bid. Nobody's liking that kind of referral arrangement. Nobody's liking to work like that. And most investors aren't going to show up to the second offer if that's what the first one looked like, right?
No. Yeah. It happens to us quite frequently. I mean, because I market to probates, for people to file probates, and we'll get it's usually the newly filed stuff. I've found our biggest deals come from the old stuff. People that filed probate 6 months, a year, 2 years ago, and they waited to sell the property till later. Right.
Yeah. Because those people usually aren't in the cash crunch. So a lot of those like people that are trying to sell it like the month that mom dies, they usually mortgage on the property. They usually don't have a way to upkeep it. And then there are usually lower equity deals, right? So you find out that for some reason, mortgage companies will mortgage out to a 115-year-old. You're like,
reverse mortgages. Oh my gosh.
like what?
Yeah.
You have Social Security only income and your mortgage is $4,000. Like, this is ridiculous. So you'll find that especially in the last couple of years, finance companies are getting a little bit crazier with their underwriting. They're letting people that are fully retired still come in and do 30-year mortgages. And what that does is makes it so that whenever there is a loss, a death, there's not the equity to be had in those deals. And so people are trying to flip those things quick, and they're just upside down.
Yeah, we see that a lot with, I don't know who does the appraisals on reverse mortgages, but almost every single reverse mortgage we have gotten in as far as a lead in our business, I don't know how they allowed them to borrow that much money against that. Like, it's insane. And it's like, that property wasn't even worth that 5 years ago when you wrote the loan. What?
There's a reason that those are considered more predatory than what a lot of seniors do. But as we get older and we're on a fixed income, we feel some cash scarcity, we fall for traps like that. And I agree with you that most of them are not good for the homeowner. They sell them the same way they used to sell garbage annuities, which is, have income for life. Don't worry about your money. You've worked so hard. Your kids are going to be fine. And I think that the real issue you run into with reverse mortgages is if somebody moves out, so they go to an assisted living or a nursing home, that's usually an end to that. It's a triggering event for them to be able to come in and foreclose on the property. And then I think a lot of people never recognized how much equity they were giving up with their reverse mortgage. So because of the way they're structured, and they're all a little different, but especially the ones that don't have monthly repayment or the ones that have a low monthly repayment, you eat up your equity so fast that there might not be anything left there that you own. And a lot of times that's a surprise to even the spouse, but especially the kids, if it's like a parent going to the children, is they think they're about to inherit a $300,000 house, and you go find out that there's $40,000 of equity in this thing. And they're like, well, I want to sue the, underwriter. I want to sue the mortgage company. They took advantage of mom or dad. And those just aren't the kind of cases in Georgia that are usually worth doing. If you're in a state that has like treble damages for elder abuse like Florida does, it definitely has more teeth. But in Georgia, those things usually aren't worth the cost of litigation.
So you mentioned going into assisted living. That's actually a great topic. We have encountered some deals before where the family needs to sell the house, right, in order to put mom or dad into assisted living because they're getting government assistance. So why don't you just quickly talk about what happens after the fact, right? The leaning and all that stuff and how that all works. We've encountered that quite a bit.
So, quick primer. Whenever somebody switches over to not being able to live independently, in-home caregivers in Georgia average between $28 and $30 an hour. Most people can't afford that, so they need some economies of scale. They look at what's called an assisted living, which are these big, beautiful properties. There's just literally hundreds of them that are popping up right now. They offer food, housekeeping, and even things like bathing, toileting, medication management. Those kind of things cost on average $5,000 to $6,500 a month. Most people's income is not that high. And so whenever they move out of their house, a lot of times they'll use their home as equity to kind of build up the nest egg to budget for those assisted livings. The big problem that people run into is you can't qualify for government benefits that help subsidize like nursing homes and still have rental income coming from your house, because they take your income whenever you go on government benefits. The income you get from renting your house would just go to the state essentially. And so what we help people do if they're in that situation is protect the equity in their home and their ability to rent it later. But you guys out there that are doing kind of wholesaling realize that a one-door rental business isn't really profitable.
No.
It's a bunch of nightmares, a lot of turnover, the AC breaks, the roof breaks, the garbage disposal breaks, whatever. It's just hard to be profitable on like kind of what I'm calling one door, one property.
Right.
So we actually push most people away from the idea that they're going to rent it unless they have experience in it in the past. And then the problem is if you sell it, the equity in the home often puts you over what are called asset limits. So if you have more than about $155,000 as a couple, you can't qualify for Medicaid in most states. And so most people at that age have more than that in equity in their home. And so we use different types of trusts or sometimes even an LLC to be able to change what is considered exempt versus non-exempt. Mm-hmm. So if you are somebody that's trying to do a deal with somebody moving into an assisted living, connecting them with an elder law attorney and making sure that it takes that stress away from them where they're still going to get the benefits, that the money's protected, can definitely help you have a value add of working with you versus the other people that they're getting mailers from or connecting with. The big issue is if they go into like a nursing home on Medicaid and they still have their house, there's no money cash flow left over from their income to pay the mortgage. So then the kids usually end up having to pay that. And then the state puts a lien on that title that says whatever we've paid, which remember we talked about assisted living being like $500 to $6,500. Mm-hmm. Those are about $9,000 a month. And so now there's this lien that grows every month by $9,000. And really that just sucks any equity that people have right out of there. And so the kids don't even get paid back usually about what they paid for the mortgage. So it's a really bad deal for the children. They don't get the equity of the house. They put money into it to try and keep it. Then the state takes it back with what's called clawback or estate recovery.
Yep.
And that's just a surprise to everybody because people think like, oh, mom got approved on Medicaid. The house is safe.
Right.
Not. And most people don't even know how to check that there's a lien. They don't know how to make sure that the property is saved. That's really where somebody like myself, the elder law attorney at Nelson Elder Care Law, can come in and add hundreds of thousands of dollars in value there. But
yeah,
again, the timing on that is critical. People will talk about a 5-year look back. Like if you've sold your home in 5 years or you've gifted anything in 5 years, you don't qualify. If you work with an elder law attorney like us, we can get around most of those look back periods.
Okay, that's awesome. That's a great piece of advice there. So let's kind of jump quickly. We're kind of running a little bit out of time here, but let's jump over. Just going to cover some basic questions here. Like you kind of touched on it earlier. So in Georgia, typically how long does there's different phases of probate. You file a probate, sell the property, and then probate's actually over. What would you say the common timeline for most? It's all different, right?
Yeah, we kind of break it up into 4 buckets. So the pre-filing bucket for us usually takes 30 to 45 days. It's getting everything moved around so that you can actually get the authority to be able to sell a home. We would like to see that done in 30 to 45 days, 60 days at the latest. Mm-hmm. Then you'd have the ability to sell, close a deal, anything like that. A lot of people will let you list the home even before you have the authority to sell it. So if you start right away, you can have that deal closed in about 60 to 75 days. There is a creditor's period where the creditors get notice of the probate being open, and that runs for 120 days. And that's why in Georgia, it's really, really hard to close any kind of estate from the time the person died or you opened it, less than 6 months. So really probate's going to take a minimum of 6 to 9 months for most people before they're able to distribute the money to the siblings or themselves. Mm-hmm. And then the whole process with getting sign-offs, all the bonds released, all the money transferred, for most people takes 9 months to 12. So about a year is what most people should bank on. But the cool thing about that most people, especially in your industry, don't understand is you can sell that house within 30 to 60 days. It doesn't have to be that you're waiting 90 days, 120 days, 6 months, a year, anything like that. And there's actually some reasons not to. if you look at the way the taxes work, you want to sell that house really as quick as you can so there's no capital gains at the estate level.
For sure, definitely. And from that standpoint too, like, what would you say the fastest time, right? That like realistically, like if everything is perfect and it's a very simple estate, like what's the quickest that you could probably sell a property?
The absolute quickest from the day of the engagement agreement with the firm to the day you can sell the property is probably 60 days.
60 days. Okay. Yeah. And that's usually what we tell most people, right? Now, on average, you mentioned cost earlier. On a low end probate versus a high, obviously the more complex it is, the more it costs. But from that perspective, what does probate typically cost in the state of Georgia?
With legal fees and everything, you can plan on about 3%. And then remember that the executor gets about 5%. Mm-hmm. So if you're the one that's championing the process, if you're the one that's honored with being the executor or the executrix, you get 2.5% of what comes in and 2.5% of what goes out, which is really about 5%. And then the court costs, attorney fees, everything should be about 3% or less. If you really going in cheap, you can find it for like $2,000 sometimes. Mm-hmm. But remember, that's where you fall into that trap of the attorney is really just doing a consult with you. They're not navigating you through the process. So if you just think about it logically, even though you can sell the house in 60 days, the attorney has to represent the family for 6 to 9 months. If you did that for $2,000, you're only getting paid $240 a month. No attorney is really working for that. And so that's why I think sometimes people come in and you just have to understand, are you going to go through the DIY process? Are you really going to take a stab at it your own, which you can do, but still keep in mind you have publication costs, you have filing fees with the court, things like that. But most of the time, legal fees are going to be about 3%, including all court costs. The executor gets 5%. So you're about 8% all in for costs.
Okay. That's a cool breakdown. Well, hey, Josh, I really appreciate you coming on today. So if someone wants to get a hold of you guys and your firm, what is the best way to get a hold of you?
Yeah, really glad to be here, but I appreciate you having us on. We love working with you guys and your teammates. If they wanted to contact us remember, we only do Georgia, but we do it statewide. It's NelsonElderCareLaw.com, or you can give us a call at 678-250-9355.
Awesome. Hey, Josh, thanks for coming on, buddy. I really appreciate your time. I know your time's worth a lot of money, so I'm going to let you run. But just fantastic wealth of information today. So thank you so much for coming on today.
Thanks so much, Brent.
All right, talk to you later, bud.